Have you ever felt, in a moment of real danger or real pain, a presence so gentle and so certain that you couldn't explain it, only receive it? Have you ever wondered why, in the darkest seasons of your life, something in you instinctively reached not for answers but for her? What if the protection you've been searching for was never something you had to earn, but something that has been over you, quietly and completely, since the very beginning? There is a woman who has never stopped, watching over you, not from a distance, not conditionally, not only in the moments when you remembered to ask. Always. That is what Saint Thérèse of Lisieux discovered about Our Lady, not through theology, not through apparitions, not through anything dramatic or extraordinary, through something far more intimate and far more available to every single one of us. And what she found will change the way you understand protection, intercession, and the quiet, constant presence of a mother who has never once looked away from you. Subscribe, because what follows isn't about devotion as obligation, it's about love as shelter. Most of us have been shaped in ways we don't always recognize by the experience of love that came with conditions, love that arrived fully when we performed well and contracted when we didn't, love that was present in the good seasons and harder to locate in the difficult ones, love that required something from us, achievement, compliance, emotional management, the maintenance of a version of ourselves that was acceptable enough to keep the love in place. We learned slowly and thoroughly that love had to be earned, and then we brought that learning into our spiritual lives without realizing it. We brought it into our relationship with God, believing His favor fluctuated with our faithfulness. We brought it into our prayer, feeling more worthy on the days we had prayed consistently and less worthy on the days we hadn't. We brought it, quietly and almost inevitably, into our understanding of Our Lady. We made her approval something to be merited. Thérèse refused that framework entirely, not because she was naive about sin or indifferent to the seriousness of the spiritual life, but because she had understood something about Mary that cuts through every layer of performance and merit and religious anxiety and reaches something clean and permanent underneath. Mary is a mother, not a judge, not a gatekeeper, not a celestial accountant monitoring the quality and consistency of your devotion before deciding how much maternal care to extend in your direction. A mother. And Thérèse understood motherhood, real motherhood, the kind that does not require the child to be impressive or consistent or spiritually adequate, as the most accurate lens through which to understand what Our Lady actually is to each of us. She wrote about Mary not with the detached reverence of someone admiring a statue. She wrote about her the way you write about someone you know, someone present, someone close, someone whose love you have actually felt in the particular texture of specific moments in your real life. Thérèse lost her own mother, Zélie, when she was 4 years old. 4 years old, before memory fully forms, before a child has language for grief, before the loss can be processed as anything other than a sudden, inexplicable absence where warmth used to be. She grew up shaped by that absence in ways she herself acknowledged. She was sensitive, deeply so. She cried easily. She needed reassurance. She carried a tenderness that was partly gift and partly wound, the particular softness of a person who learned early that the people you love can disappear. And into that absence, into that specific, personal, motherless place in her, she found Mary, not as a replacement, not as a theological concept to fill an emotional gap, as a real presence, as the genuine, living maternal attentiveness of a woman who had been given from the cross to be mother to every person who would ever need one. "When I am gone," Jesus said, looking at John, "here is your mother." Thérèse received those words personally, directly, as spoken to her as much as to anyone who had ever stood in need of a mother's covering. And what she discovered in receiving them, in actually allowing herself to be mothered by Mary, rather than simply admiring her from a respectful distance, was this: the watching over had never required her worthiness to begin with. Think about how a mother watches over a sleeping child. The child is doing nothing, contributing nothing, performing nothing. The child is entirely unconscious, entirely passive, entirely dependent, and the mother's watching is at its most complete. There is no transaction happening, no merit being assessed. The watching is pure, unconditional, uninterrupted by anything the child is or isn't doing. That is the image Thérèse carried of Our Lady's presence over each of us. Not activated by our devotion, not intensified by our rosaries or diminished by our inconsistency, not contingent on anything we bring or fail to bring, simply present. The way a mother is simply present to her child, aware, attentive, covering, interceding, not because the child has earned it, but because the child is hers. You are hers. That is the foundation of everything Thérèse understood about Our Lady's protection. Not a relationship you have to build from scratch through accumulated acts of devotion. A relationship that already exists, that existed before you were aware of it, that will exist beyond your awareness of it, that is not created by your recognition of it, but only more fully received. You were given a mother. At the cross, in the darkest moment in human history, in the moment when everything seemed most broken and most lost, in that exact moment, the gift was given. And it was not given conditionally. It was not given to the theologically precise or the devotionally consistent or the spiritually accomplished. It was given in a moment of total devastation to a man who had just watched his teacher die, a man with nothing to offer, nothing to recommend him, nothing but his presence and his love and his grief. And it was enough. Your presence is enough. Your love, however imperfect and inconsistent, is enough. Your grief, your confusion, your distance, your long seasons of forgetting, none of it has interrupted the watching. None of it has caused the gaze to turn away. Thérèse knew this, lived this, built her entire relationship with Our Lady on this single, radical, utterly simple reality. She didn't have to deserve the mother. She just had to receive her. And the receiving, the simple, humble, open-handed act of allowing yourself to be covered by a love you did not earn, that is where everything begins. Not with more effort, not with more devotion, not with the resolution to be more consistent starting Monday. With this, right now. In whatever state you are in, you are watched over, you have always been watched over. Come home to that. There is a question that lives underneath a lot of people's relationship with Our Lady. They don't always say it directly, but it shapes the way they approach her, the hesitation they feel before they do, the quiet uncertainty that lingers even in the most sincere acts of Marian devotion. The question is this: why her? If God is already present, already attentive, already more willing to give than we are to receive, why bring Mary into it? Why the intercession? Why the mediation? Why not go directly, always only to the source? It is an honest question, and it deserves an honest answer, not a defensive one, not an answer that argues or proves or constructs an elaborate theological case. Thérèse never argued her way into devotion. She loved her way in, and the answer she lived is simpler and more human and more beautiful than any argument could be. Think about the people in your life who have carried your prayers. The friend who said, without being asked, "I'm going to pray for you today," and you felt the difference. The grandmother who kept a list of everyone she interceded for and brought them, name by name, before God every morning. The person who, in a moment of crisis, placed their hand on you and prayed with such genuine love that something in you steadied in a way it hadn't been able to steady on its own. You have felt this, the prayer of another person reaching something in you and for you that your own prayer, in that moment, could not reach. This is intercession, not as theological mechanism, as human reality, as the lived experience of love that extends itself beyond its own concerns and carries another person into the presence of God. Now, imagine that intercession coming from her, from the woman who said yes with her whole life, from the woman who carried love incarnate in her own body and learned in the most intimate possible way what it means to hold someone completely, from the woman who stood at the cross and did not run, who absorbed the full weight of human suffering at its most extreme and remained upright, present, unbroken in her love, from the woman who knows what it is to watch someone she loves suffer and be unable to stop it, who knows what it is to trust God in the darkness when trust is the only thing remaining, who knows grief and confusion and the specific pain of a mother's love that cannot protect its child from everything the world will bring, She knows. That is the first thing Thérèse would tell you about why Mary's intercession matters, not as doctrine, as intimacy. She knows your life from the inside, not theoretically, not from a distance of celestial remove. From the lived human experience of a woman who walked through joy and suffering and love and loss and the full spectrum of what it means to exist in a human body in a complicated world. When she intercedes for you, she is not interceding as a stranger. She is interceding as someone who understands the specific weight of what you are carrying, because weight, real weight, the kind that bends you, is something she has carried herself. Thérèse wrote about Our Lady with a tenderness that is almost startling in its simplicity. She resisted, explicitly and deliberately, the tendency to place Mary so far above ordinary human experience that she became unreachable. She wrote that she wanted to show Mary as approachable, as someone who could be loved, not just venerated, as someone close, not just exalted. She wrote, "I know that at Nazareth she lived very simply, not in ecstasy, not in continuous supernatural experience, not in a state so elevated that the ordinary concerns of daily life could not touch her, simply, in a small house, with work to do, and meals to prepare, and a child to raise, and a husband to love, and neighbors who didn't always understand her, and a life that from the outside looked entirely unremarkable. That is the woman who intercedes for you, not a marble figure, not an abstraction. A woman who has lived, who has loved, who has suffered, who has trusted God in the dark, and who now, from the fullness of what she has become, turns that love in your direction with a specificity and a tenderness that has your name on it." Thérèse experienced this personally. When she was 10 years old, she became severely ill, an illness so serious that her family feared for her life. She lay in bed for weeks, delirious, her body failing in ways that the medicine of her time could not address. Her sisters prayed, the family prayed, and Thérèse turned to the statue of Our Lady that stood in her room. She didn't compose an elaborate prayer. She didn't invoke the correct theological formulas. She looked at the statue with everything she had, with the raw, unmediated, completely honest need of a sick child who needed her mother. And she asked, and she described what happened next, not as a vision, not as a supernatural phenomenon, but as something she found almost impossible to put into words. She said the statue came alive for her, that Mary smiled at her, that in that smile she received something that moved through her entire being and left her healed, not just physically, but in some interior way she spent years trying to describe. What healed her, she said, was not the miracle. It was the smile, the particular quality of love in it, the recognition, the sense of being seen completely, in her fear and her need and her smallness, and smiled at anyway. Smiled at because of it. Because the smallness was not a problem to be overlooked, but the very thing that opened the fullness of the mother's heart toward her. She was small, and the smile came. You are small too, in your fear and your need and your very human inadequacy in the face of everything life asks of you. You are small. And that smallness is not an obstacle to her intercession. It is its invitation. The smaller you are, the more completely she can cover you. That is how she intercedes, not waiting for you to be sufficient, moving toward you in your insufficiency, meeting you in the exact place where you most need to be met, before you have explained yourself, before you have qualified yourself, before you have found the words for what you need. She already knows. She is already asking on your behalf. Right now, in this moment, with your name, with the full weight of a mother's love that has never once required you to deserve it. Bring her your smallness. Let her smile find you. That is the whole of it. There is a conversation no one warns you about before you enter the spiritual life. The conversation about suffering. Not suffering in the abstract, not the theological frameworks that explain why suffering exists or what purpose it serves in the grand architecture of salvation. The specific, personal, ordinary suffering of your actual life. The kind that doesn't feel redemptive when you're inside it. The kind that doesn't announce its meaning as it arrives. The kind that simply lands, heavy, uninvited, resistant to explanation, and asks you to keep living anyway. Most people come to faith hoping, at least in part, that it will protect them from this. Not all suffering, perhaps, but the worst of it, the unbearable kind, the kind that breaks things permanently. They come hoping that devotion will function as a kind of shelter, that if they love God sincerely enough, if they pray consistently enough, if they keep their relationship with Our Lady close enough, the sharpest edges of human pain will somehow be softened for them. And then the suffering comes anyway, and in the gap between what they hoped faith would do and what it actually does in the face of real pain, a crisis forms, a quiet, destabilizing, deeply personal crisis about what any of this is actually for. Thérèse knew that gap intimately. She watched her mother die before she had the language to grieve it. She watched her father's mind deteriorate, the man she had adored completely, the man she called her king, slowly, painfully, in ways that stripped him of the dignity she had always associated with him. She entered a convent at 15 and discovered that religious life was not a refuge from human difficulty, but a container that concentrated it. The friction of close community, the demands of obedience, the physical hardship of Carmelite life, the spiritual darkness that descended and never fully lifted. She suffered, consistently, variously, without the dramatic consolations that might have made the suffering feel more meaningful in the moment. And she learned everything she knew about how to carry it by looking at Mary. Specifically, and this is the part that tends to be overlooked, by looking at the Mary of the Gospels, the actual woman as she appears in the text, not the Mary of later legend or pious embellishment, the Mary who appears in real scenes, in real moments, and who carries in those scenes something that Thérèse recognized immediately as the deepest and most human kind of courage. Think about the Annunciation. A young woman, a girl really by the standards of her time, is visited by an angel and told that her life is about to become something she could not have prepared for, that she will carry something sacred and dangerous, that the path ahead will require more of her than any path she could have chosen for herself. And she says yes, not with full understanding, not with a clear picture of where the yes will take her, with trust, with the particular kind of courage that doesn't require certainty in order to move forward. Thérèse saw in that yes the template for her own life, not the dramatic yes of someone who has seen all the consequences and accepted them with clear eyes, the humble, unknowing, trusting yes of someone who has decided that love is sufficient reason to proceed even without a map. Then think about the presentation. When Simeon takes the child in his arms and turns to Mary and says, in words that must have landed with the weight of a stone, "A sword will pierce your own soul too." A sword, not a difficulty, not a challenge, not an inconvenience that faith will smooth over. A sword, something that will go all the way through. And Mary receives that prophecy and continues. She doesn't collapse. She doesn't demand that God revise the plan. She holds the child and she continues, carrying now not only the joy of what she has been given, but the foreknowledge of the cost. Thérèse looked at that moment and understood something essential. Our Lady was not protected from suffering by her closeness to God. She was accompanied through it. There is a difference so vast between those two things that the whole of the spiritual life shifts depending on which one you believe. If you believe that closeness to God protects you from suffering, then every hard thing that happens becomes evidence against your faith. Every loss, every illness, every relationship that breaks, every prayer that goes unanswered, all of it becomes a reason to doubt, a suggestion that perhaps you are not as close to God as you thought, a quiet indictment of your spiritual life. But if you believe what Thérèse learned from Our Lady, that closeness to God does not remove suffering, but transforms your capacity to carry it, then everything changes. The suffering is still real. It still hurts with the full force of what it is. There is no spiritual bypass, no anesthetic of devotion that makes the pain less sharp. Thérèse never pretended otherwise. She was honest about pain in a way that can be startling when you read her closely. But the carrying is different, because you are not carrying it alone. Mary stood at the cross. She did not stand there because her faith protected her from the full reality of what was happening. She stood there because her faith gave her the capacity to remain present to it, to not look away, to not run, to hold her love open in the face of the most devastating thing a mother can witness. And from that standing, from that specific, terrible, unprotected, fully present act of remaining, something was forged in her that became available to every person who would ever need to stand in their own impossible place and find they could not do it alone. She knows how to stand in the unbearable. She has done it. And when you are in your unbearable place, when the thing that was not supposed to happen has happened, and the pain is real, and the faith feels insufficient, and you do not know how to remain present to your own life, she stands with you, not to explain it, not to fix it, not to offer theological frameworks that make it make sense, to stand beside you, the way she stood at the cross, fully present, fully loving, completely unwilling to look away from you in your suffering even for a moment. Thérèse learned from Our Lady that this is what accompaniment looks like, not the removal of the sword, the presence of a mother while the sword is doing what swords do. And she discovered, in her own suffering, in the long darkness, in the physical deterioration of her final years, that this presence was not nothing. It was, in fact, everything. Because the suffering that is witnessed by love is fundamentally different from the suffering that is endured alone. It is still suffering. It still costs what it costs. It still leaves marks. But it does not isolate. It does not convince you that you have been abandoned. It does not do the secondary damage of making you feel that your pain has placed you outside the reach of love. You are not outside the reach of love. You were never outside it. Our Lady is standing exactly where you are. She has been standing there longer than you know. There is something that happens when you are truly seen, not observed, not assessed, not evaluated against some standard of who you should be or how far you've come or how much progress you've made since the last time someone looked closely at you. Seen, the way a mother sees a child she loves without condition, the way a gaze lands on you and carries in it the complete, unhurried, nothing-to-prove knowledge of who you are, and stays, doesn't flinch, doesn't qualify, doesn't look away when it encounters the parts of you that are still unfinished, still wounded, still complicated and contradictory, and far from the version of yourself you're always promising to become. Just stays. Most people have experienced this kind of gaze so rarely that when they encounter it, in a friendship, in a moment of genuine intimacy, in a prayer that suddenly feels less like speaking into a wall and more like being known, it is almost overwhelming, almost too much to receive. Because we have been so thoroughly trained to expect that love comes with an evaluative component, that being seen means being judged, that the closer someone looks, the more likely they are to find something that changes what they feel about you. Thérèse built her entire understanding of Our Lady's presence around a single, radical, quietly revolutionary conviction. The gaze never leaves. Not when you are faithful, and not when you are failing. Not when your prayer is consistent, and not when it has been weeks since you genuinely turned toward God. Not when you are at your most loving, and not when you are at your most difficult. Not in the seasons of consolation, and not in the long grey stretches where nothing feels sacred and everything feels like maintenance. The gaze is there, always, without interruption, without condition, without the fluctuation that characterizes every human love we have ever known. She wrote, and the simplicity of this line has stayed with people for over a century because simplicity, when it is true, does not age. Our Lady watches over me like a mother watches over her child. Like a mother watches over her child, not like a saint watches over a devotee, not like a celestial figure dispenses grace to the spiritually qualified. Like a mother, in the most ordinary, most human, most viscerally real sense of what that means. A mother who does not require the child to be awake to watch over them. A mother whose attention does not depend on the child's awareness of it. A mother whose love is not activated by the child's need and deactivated by the child's forgetting. It simply is, continuous, present, unwavering in a way that has nothing to do with the child's behavior and everything to do with the nature of the love itself. This is what Thérèse received from Our Lady, and this is what she is offering to pass directly to you. Because here is the thing about the watching that most people miss, the thing that gets lost in the theological frameworks and the devotional practices and the structured approaches to Marian spirituality that are genuinely good, but can sometimes unintentionally obscure the most important thing. You do not have to earn the gaze. You do not have to maintain it through consistent devotion. You do not have to be spiritually together enough to deserve it. You do not have to resolve your doubts or clean up your prayer life or become a more committed version of yourself before Our Lady's attention is fully available to you. It is available right now, in whatever state you are in, with whatever you are carrying, with however long it has been since you last turned toward her, with however complicated or distant or complicated again your relationship with faith has been over the years. She has been watching, the whole time, through all of it. Thérèse understood this not as a comfortable idea, but as a lived reality that she returned to again and again in the hardest moments of her life. When the darkness came, the real darkness, the 18 months of spiritual fog where she could not feel the presence of God, where the faith she had built her life on felt suddenly and terrifyingly thin, she returned to this, not to feeling, not to consolation, not to the warm sense of God's nearness that had characterized her earlier years, to the simple, undemonstrable, chosen-in-the-dark conviction that the gaze had not moved, that Our Lady was still watching, that nothing she was feeling or failing to feel had altered the fundamental reality of being covered, being held, being seen by a love that does not require her reciprocal awareness to remain completely itself. She held on to this like a handhold in the dark, and it held, not because it made the darkness lighter, but because it made the darkness bearable, because there is a difference, a profound, life-altering difference between suffering in the dark alone and suffering in the dark while being watched over by love. The darkness is the same, but you are not alone in it. Think about your own life right now, the parts of it you would rather not look at directly, the places where you feel most inadequate, most unworthy, most aware of the gap between who you are and who you intended to become, the private failures, the quiet shames, the patterns you keep returning to despite your genuine desire to be different, the prayers you haven't prayed, the love you haven't given, the version of yourself you've been meaning to become for longer than you'd like to admit. Our Lady sees all of it, not with judgment, not with the disappointed assessment of someone who expected more from you, with the particular tenderness that a mother reserves for the child who is struggling, with the specific, unhurried, nothing is too far gone love of someone who knew you before you knew yourself and has never once revised her opinion of your worth based on your performance. She sees the best of you, the deepest of you, the you that exists underneath the failing and the forgetting and the long seasons of spiritual mediocrity, and she has not looked away from that you for a single moment. Thérèse spent her whole life learning to receive this, not to earn it, receive it. The subtle but enormous difference between a spirituality of striving and a spirituality of openness, between the exhausting effort to make yourself worthy of love and the quiet, revolutionary act of simply allowing love to find you where you are. This is the invitation Our Lady extends to you right now, not to become more, not to do more, not to resolve yourself into a tidier, more devotionally consistent, more spiritually impressive version of yourself before you approach her. To stop, to be still for just a moment inside your actual life, your actual self, your actual complicated and beautiful and unfinished humanity, and to let the gaze find you. It has been looking for you. It has always been looking for you. Right here, in this moment. In this exact version of yourself that you woke up as this morning, tired or hopeful or somewhere complicated in between. You are seen. You are covered. You are held inside a love that began before you were born and will continue long after every fear you have ever carried has dissolved into the mercy that was always, always larger than the fear. That is how Our Lady watches over you, not from far away, from right here, beside you, around you, between you and everything that would diminish you. A mother's gaze, steady and sure and completely, irreversibly yours. Before this ends, I want to offer you something. Because if what you heard today moved something in you, if the idea of being watched over, of being seen without condition, of being covered by a love that does not require your worthiness to remain completely itself, if that reached a place in you that needed to be reached, then I want you to know that you don't have to carry your days without that reminder. Every single day, our channel members receive an exclusive prayer, written specifically for them. As prayer to begin the morning with, asking for God's protection over everything the day will bring. Carried by the intercession of Saint Thérèse, offered under the gaze of Our Lady, spoken over you before the world gets loud, and the demands begin, and the ordinary weight of living pulls your attention in every direction. One prayer, every morning, waiting for you before the day begins, so that you wake up already covered, already accompanied, already reminded that the gaze has not moved while you slept, that love was watching over you through the night and is watching still as the new day opens. Because the little way was never meant to be walked alone, and neither was your day. Join our community of members. The link is right below. Every morning, one prayer. Your name held in intercession by a saint who knew exactly what it meant to need a mother's covering, and found it. Come and be covered too.